So the DJI Osmo Pocket 4P has really surprised me in a lot of ways. I've been filming with this camera for about a week now, and I've played around with a lot of settings. And what I want to do in today's video is I want to show you each of the settings that I have found to yield the best results so that you too can get incredible results with the Pocket 4P. So let's do an overview of what the different parts of this camera are. First of all, this is the rotatable touchscreen. Rotating it to the right is going to power it on, and then rotating it back to the left is either going to give you the vertical filming mode, or it's going to power off if you don't interact with the screen. And when it comes to the camera lenses up here, these are both labeled, but this is the Med Tele lens, so this is the 3X. This gives you a 60mm focal length, which is really cool. There's a lot of cool potential when filming with that. And then this one down here that says 1 inch, this is the 1X, and the 1X default focal length is 20mm. And then when you have the screen flipped and turned on, it's going to reveal two buttons right here. This first button with the plus sign on it, that is the zoom button. So if you push and hold the zoom button, it's going to zoom in, and it's going to show you the focal length down here at the bottom. So you can go a full 12X with that zoom, which is very far. So if you tap twice, it's going to take you to 6X. Tap once, it's going to take you back to 1X. So if you want the 12, you do have to hold this down to get all the way to the 12. And then this light right here, of course, that is the status LED light. So when that is solid green, that means the Pocket 4P is ready to use. When it's temporarily off and stays green, that means you're taking a photo. When it blinks red slowly, that means you are recording a video. And of course, the red up here also indicates you're recording a video. And then if it blinks red 3 times rapidly, that means you're powering off or about to power off because of low battery. Like that right there. And if it blinks red and green alternately, that means you're installing a firmware update. And this button right here, by the way, with the C on it, this is a custom button. If you click on it once, it says joystick controls tilt. If you click again, it says joystick controls zoom. So you can swap that for the joystick here, but you also can customize in the menu here, the general menu, what that C button does, and I'll show you that in a moment. You've actually got quite a few different options. And then as I mentioned, this of course is the 5D joystick. So you can have this control zoom, but what I like to do is I like to have this control the tilt of the gimbal. And I'm gonna show you in a moment how to get that nice, slow, controlled cinematic tilt with this gimbal. You can adjust it so it goes faster or slower. I have it set so that it goes nice and slow right now, because that is one of the keys to getting cinematic footage. And then anytime you want it to recenter automatically, just click it twice. And anytime you want it to pan around and face toward you, just click 3 times and it's going to face toward you. Click 3 times again to change it to the other direction. And this right here at the back of the gimbal head, these are the contacts. So these contacts right here are where you can attach lights or certain other accessories from DJI. Now the standard bundle with the Pocket 4P does ship with a light, so you can easily connect the light right here. And if you're curious about the motors on here, this is of course the pan motor. This one up here is the roll motor. And then this one on the side and this side, those are the tilt motors. And then this camera does have microphones on it in a couple different places. The microphones are found right here. There's one on the side. In addition, there's one right here as well. There's also one right here. So there's mics on both sides of the screen. And while we're here on this side, I would like to note this is the micro SD card slot right here. So you pull this back and right there is where you can insert a micro SD card. Now this does have the more than 100 gigabytes of built-in storage, which is a very nice feature. And the interesting thing, in 4K 24 or 4K 30 at a high bit rate, you can get more than 2 hours of footage on the internal storage. So I have actually found myself able to use the internal storage for most of my adventures without even needing a micro SD card, which is really nice right now because micro SD cards and storage in general are very expensive right now. So I really like it that DJI chose to do that. And then of course, this does have a 1/4 inch 20 thread mount on the bottom. That's how I have it mounted on the tripod right here. And of course, this has a USB-C port as well. So one of those USB-C ports is here on the back of this extension right here. And then the other one is found at the base of this. So this is clipped into the one on the bottom of the main camera unit. So something to note, when you first power on the camera, when you've taken it out of the box, it is going to prompt you for a firmware update. So you want to make sure you install that firmware update using the DJI Mimo app. It is going to take a couple minutes to install. You will also be prompted to activate the camera using the DJI Mimo app. And by the way, I live in the United States and I had no problem activating this camera. So next, we're going to talk about the touchscreen operation so that you know what each of the gestures do on the touchscreen. So first of all, this screen as a whole is called the live view. So this is a live view of what your camera is seeing. And if you want to do some focusing and metering, all you have to do is single tap it. And basically you want to tap this box wherever you want this camera to focus if you don't want it to do a general autofocus. So if you want it to focus up here, tap there. If you want it to focus down here, tap there. And it's going to properly expose and focus on that part of the frame. Up here in the upper left is the storage capacity remaining. And as I just mentioned, this shows 2 hours and 30 minutes remaining. And that is just with the internal storage. So that is a lot of space. And then this icon right here in the center, this is the smart gimbal mode. So if you click on that, this is going to show you a bunch of different options you have, including the multi-person tracking, the spotlight follow, and then you can go down here, you can do dynamic framing, you can do a spin shot 90 degrees, you can do a spin shot 180, and basically when you select any of these, you're just going to click start. I won't read you what all of these say. You obviously can explore that, but there are some options here, and I encourage you to try them out. Some of them are very useful. And then down here in the lower left, this is the shooting mode. So currently we are in video mode, but in a moment, I'm gonna go through all the settings for these modes. But once you click on that, you can toggle around. And then once you've selected your mode, just let off on it for a moment and it's going to go to that mode. And then this right here where it says the 4K 24, that is your shooting specification. So you can swipe up to change those right here. It's where you can change your resolution and your frame rate. And then down here at the bottom, this of course shows you your different zoom levels. So right now we are at the 1x using the standard 1-inch sensor. But of course the 3x can be achieved using the Med Tele mode on the other lens up here. Even though it doesn't have the full capabilities of the camera, which I'll explain in a moment, that Med Tele mode still does allow you to use D-Log. You just can't use D-Log 2. But the D-Log and the D-Log 2 can be graded and go very nicely together. And then over here in this bottom right corner, this is the gimbal rotate. So if you want to do it without clicking this, you can just click that button and it's going to rotate. And then if you want it to rotate back, just click it again. And then over here on the side, this represents the joystick control. So you can click it once and it's going to change the joystick to zoom. And you can click it again and it's going to change it to the joystick controlling the tilt. And then finally up here in the upper right, this is the battery level. So currently the built-in battery on here has 89% remaining. So let's talk about the swipes. If you swipe up, this is how you can change the parameter settings. If you swipe left from the right-hand side, this is where you can change the image and audio settings. If you swipe down from the top, this is going to be your control center. This is where I'm going to show you the settings in a moment. And then finally, if you swipe right from the left-hand side, this is where you can look at the footage that you've recorded on here. And if you want to see more than just the last clip, click on the squares here, and you're going to be able to toggle through all of the clips that you filmed. So in order to get into the control center, we're going to swipe down and we're going to start changing some settings. So first of all, this is how you can set your custom modes. So when you have all of your parameters, image and audio settings keyed in, you're going to click here and you're going to confirm everything's there that you want, and then you're going to click confirm and it's going to save it as a preset. Now you can see that was offering me C3, and that's because I've already saved C1 and C2 as presets. So that is where you save presets. Now with the wireless microphone, I'm actually using the DJI Mic 3 right now to record for this video, so I'm not going to connect it. But this is where you would go to Bluetooth pair it. And then down here, you're gonna have all of those settings that you can change. And if you really want the best audio out of the Pocket 4P, I highly recommend using a DJI mic. with this camera. And this next setting right here, this is where you can control the fill light settings. So if you're using the fill light, this is where you're going to adjust them. If you want to use gestures, you can turn this on right here, and this will show you the different gestures that you can use. And it really has a nice explanation on here. I love how easy it makes it to understand them. And this next one is key. We want to go into this. This is where we can change a lot of our settings. And the first one we want to change is joystick speed. For zoom and for gimbal, I like to have these both on 1. 1 represents the slowest speed for zoom and the slowest movement for the gimbal. And I find that gives me the most cinematic looking footage. So those are the settings that I use there. This one right here is super important, bitrate. It's going to start off at standard by default, but you most certainly want to select high, because high is going to give you the very best quality footage, and it's really going to make a difference. And the first time you take it out of the box, I do recommend doing the gimbal calibration right here. It's going to calibrate the gimbal, just make sure you have it on a flat surface standing up, and it's going to take about 30 seconds to do that. And then some other key settings down here that you can program: what pressing and holding the joystick does, which it does lock the gimbal. So if you want to lock it, you just press and hold right here. And then of course your gimbal startup direction. I like to have mine be forward when it's starting, but if you don't want it to be forward, if you want it facing you, you can easily do that as well. And then some other settings down here that you might want to look at is storage. If you just want to check how much you have available, which I have 94.9 available out of the 103 gigabytes right now. But then if you have an SD card in here, it's going to show you how much is available there as well. And then if you ever need to format your storage, you can do that by clicking right over here in storage. Just be aware when you format, it is going to delete everything on your micro SD card. And then if you want to do any live streaming with this camera, right here is where you're going to go to those settings. So if you're into live streaming, I definitely encourage you to check it out for that purpose. And then down here, if you ever want to use this in wearable mode, those settings are right here. So it's going to lock in selfie mode after you enable this. So if you're going to do that, that's where you would change it. And then if you want a built-in mic audio backup, this is where you can turn it on, and you can specify where you would like it saved. So I do this, and I do the video audio track, which basically that saves it as an extra audio track in the video file. So there's going to be 2 tracks there. And that's just a good idea to do that in case something happens with your wireless mic. You're still going to have built-in sound from the camera. It's not going to be as good a quality, but it's still going to be there so that you don't lose everything with the audio. And then if you want to have the option to press and hold the shutter record button to cancel recording, you can have that turned on. I think I'm a little paranoid about that, so I always turn it off. If I'm filming something incredible and I accidentally hold on it and it cancels it and I lose it all, that would be kind of sad. So I do not have that enabled. And then lens defog, this is a really interesting one here. So I have been filming in a lot of humidity and a lot of very wet, humid environments recently. So I have had this turned on. And basically this is going to make sure your lens does not fog up. But do note that it is going to take more power consumption, of course, and the temperature is going to be warmer because it's going to make sure your lens doesn't get foggy. But I currently have that on. There's probably times of the year when the air is drier that I wouldn't do that. But for me, that's very important right now. And then down here, some of the other settings I changed: screen off while recording, I put that to never. I don't want the screen to go off. And then auto power off, I put that to 5 minutes. That way, if I'm not touching this camera for 5 or using it at all, it's going to turn off automatically and it's not going to use up all of my battery power. So the next button here is the C button, and this basically allows you to customize what your custom button right here does. So single press, you have a whole bunch of different options here, and really it's up to you which one you pick. I do just have it to the default, the joystick controls zoom tilt, but you can customize a whole bunch of stuff for double press, triple press, and press and hold. So I encourage you to do that just to select things that work best for you. It is a great way to toggle certain settings really quickly. And then this button right here, if you click on it, this is the rotational speed. So I personally like to keep my rotational speed at slow. The gimbal will move very slowly and it's going to give you smoother videos. I don't like it at the default or fast. It just moves too much for my liking, so I keep it at slow. And then this right here, this is your gimbal modes. So nearly 95% of the time, I'm going to use this in follow mode. And follow mode is great for pretty much most scenarios. It's good for vlogging and a lot of cinematic filming. It's going to have this basically follow whatever way you move it. And with those slower settings, it is going to move slowly. So I find that gives me really nice smooth footage. And then swiping over, we've got more settings we can look at. So here you can actually register subjects for face tracking, which is very cool. You can do a lot of different things with that, but the camera is basically going to autofocus on them. If you choose that subject, it's going to find them in any of the frames you're recording in. So I have not set that up yet, but I have done that on other Osmo Pocket cameras and it's been very useful. So I can imagine it's as good or better on this camera. And then right here, this is where you can change the portrait or landscape mode or auto rotation. Now do note, if you film in portrait mode on here, it is going to be 3K only, and it is going to tell you that it's 3K only. So I just keep this to the auto rotation. So if I flip it vertically, it's gonna go to the 3K portrait. If I flip it horizontal, it's gonna do the 4K landscape. And then this button right here, this is the screen rotate and capture button. So when this function's enabled, basically the footage shooting is going to start as soon as you rotate the touchscreen to power on the camera. And it's going to use whatever your last settings were as the default. And then brightness, if you want to control the brightness of your screen, you can do this right here. I just keep it at the default. I find that's the best balance of seeing what I'm doing and not eating up too much of the battery. And over here, if you want to do the FT selfie mode, basically what that does is when the gimbal is in selfie orientation, the camera is going to automatically track the subject occupying the largest area of the frame. And then the tracking will only stop when the gimbal orientation is reversed. So that can be a really useful setting if you're doing a lot of selfie filming on here. That makes this an excellent camera for vlogging. And then this one right here, this is the selfie flip. When you enable it, the footage captured in selfie mode is going to automatically be mirrored to match the preview. And then of course, this right here is the volume. So you can adjust this to high, medium, low, or mute it completely. I like to do medium. I don't want it to be super loud, but I do want to have some of that feedback from the camera when I push buttons to know that I did something successfully and that it actually took the button press. And then finally over here, these are the grid references, and I do like to have the grid on. I like the 3 lines across in each direction. So I do have that enabled. I find that helps me to get my best framing that I'm looking for. And then if we swipe over one more time, we already looked at these settings for the internal storage, so I will not go through those again. So the first mode I'm going to show you the settings that I recommend for is the video mode. So we're gonna go into video, and first of all, we're gonna toggle up. Now, if you were doing video where you just want that video to be at the normal speed in which you filmed it, you wanna use 4K 24 or 4K 30. Either one is great if you're in the United States. It really just depends on preference. 4K 24 is the common movie standard. So when you see a movie in a theater, chances are it was filmed in 4K 24. Not all of them are, but most of them are. And then 4K 30 is more of the TV show standard. So when you watch a television show on TV, it's generally going to have been captured in 30 frames per second. But if you do want to do any slow motion and slow down your footage later on, and you don't want to use the slow motion mode, you can do 4K 60 here. And on a 30 frames per second timeline, you can slow it down to 50% of the original speed. And on a 24 frames per second timeline, you can do 40% of the original speed. By default though, I typically film in 4K 24. I like how that looks, and it has a very natural motion blur. Once you've keyed in those settings, you're gonna swipe from the right to the left, and you're going to make sure Pro is turned on up here. It's going to probably start off this way by default. You're just gonna click it there and turn it on. So if you don't want to get into all of the D-Log 2 and you just want to use a normal color profile with this camera, the settings I'm going to show you here are going to be for that. But if you do want to dig into D-Log 2 and D-Log, and you want to get those 17 stops that DJI touts for this camera of dynamic range, then you will want to check out the video I've linked to above. That video is going to show you all of those pro settings, and the results you can get with those are really quite incredible. But even in the normal 10-bit mode on here, the results are still quite stunning. So for the exposure here, what you want to do is you want to toggle the ISO here, and you want to set this to 100 to 800. And then for the EV value, you want to do 0.0 EV, and then you're just gonna click the check mark there. So your camera is going to choose the default shutter speed. But because this is mechanically stabilized, you don't have to worry about any of that jitter or ghosting in your footage. So even if you're in low light with those settings, the camera can lower the shutter speed quite a bit and you're still going to get great footage. Like by default right here, right now, to properly expose this, it has an ISO of 200 and it has a shutter speed of 1/50. That shutter speed of 1/50 is perfect for 24 frames per second. That is the 180-degree shutter angle. However, if you were filming in sunlight with this camera, that shutter speed is going to be much faster than the 1/50. And in that case, I would recommend ND filters for this camera. I'm going to show you how to use those ND filters in a different video as well. Those are going to block some of the light hitting the sensor on the camera, and it's going to allow it to get a slower shutter speed while still properly exposing. But if you're not using ND filters, this is what you want to do right here. And then for the white balance over here, if you were filming during the daytime, I do recommend setting this to a static value of 5600K, and that's generally going to give you good results in the daytime. However, this camera is pretty smart in how it detects the color in each scene. So if you don't want to have to do any tweaking of that color later on, you can just do the auto white balance right here, and it's going to constantly adjust it. But if you don't want it to be changing during your filming, if you do the manual and then select 5600K and then toggle this for the tint to 0 over here, that's going to keep it consistent during your filming. If you are filming at sunrise or sunset though, you do want to change this to 6500K. It's going to be those great golden hour colors. And then if you're filming in low light, you will want to put this down to about 3800K. For the glamour effects, I do not recommend having the glamour effects on. I'm gonna turn those off there. That is something you could use if you're into that and you really want like a polished face look, but I don't recommend that in general. Now the color mode, by default, if you don't want to do any grading whatsoever later on, use normal 10-bit. If you are open to grading later on, I strongly encourage you to use D-Log2 10-bit. D-Log2 10-bit is going to unlock the maximum dynamic range on here. But like I said, I'm doing an entire dedicated video for that because there are a lot of settings you want to change to go with that, including the exposure settings. You actually don't want to get an EV value of 0.0, and I'm going to explain all of that in that other video. And then down here for the focus mode, I generally recommend keeping this at continuous. And then for the focus mode over here, I recommend keeping this at default. You can change it to subject track locking, and it's going to explain down here what that does. In addition, you can also do subject priority for registered faces, but generally I just do default here for most of my filming. And then a really important setting here, the focus breathing compensation, you want that on. That's going to help ensure when your focus shifts from one subject to another, or from the foreground to the background, that it doesn't jump and look really bad. It's going to have a nice smooth shift in your focus. So you definitely want to have it set that way. And then for the image adjustment here, this is really important for getting high quality footage. So for the texture, I like to set that all the way to low. That's going to give you footage that isn't overly sharp. Overly sharp footage does not look cinematic and professional. In addition, if you are filming during the daytime, I recommend keeping the noise reduction set to -2. The only time when I would have noise reduction a little bit higher, set at 0, is if you're filming in low light and you're not doing any noise reduction later on when editing. It's going to help ensure that the noise is reduced to a nice, good-looking level. But if you're filming anytime during the day, keep it at -2. And then finally, down here, the low light image enhancement, I generally recommend turning that off. I'm going to show you settings I recommend in a moment for low light in this mode. And I'm actually gonna save those as a preset, but I like having it off because I don't want the camera automatically enhancing my image. I want to choose how to do that. So now that we've done the daytime settings, let's key in the low light ones. So low light settings are going to be anytime after dark, if you're filming, say in a city area, or if you're filming indoors, a lot of the time, these are going to apply there as well. In my case, I filmed in some tunnels and cave-like areas, and these settings are going to apply there too, when you just have the light of a flashlight or a lantern, something like that. So all you have to do for the low light settings is you want to do 2 key changes here. First of all, go up here to manual, And if you're filming in 24 frames per second, select 1/50 for your shutter speed. And over here for your ISO, select 800. Those two settings right there are key for the exposure. And then for the white balance, go down and change this to 3800K. And by the way, if you are filming in 30 frames per second, go up here and just set the shutter speed to 1/60. But since I'm filming in 24, we're gonna set it to 1/50. And then of course down here, I mentioned the image adjustment, setting this to 0. So after you've made those three changes, swipe down from the top, click here, and then click where it says custom. And then we're gonna look at our settings, and it's going to show us 4K 24, 16:9, shutter speed 1/50, ISO 800, white balance 3800K. So I'm gonna confirm that, and we now have our low light custom setting keyed in here. So whenever we wanna go to that, we just click down here, and we're gonna swipe to the left to see our custom settings, and our low light setting is right there. So switching gears now that we've done the video mode, let's go to Panorama next. So Panorama is a cool little mode on here where you can take a bunch of photos and have the camera stitch them together to make one big photo. So it's going to be both wider and taller. And I recommend doing this if you're getting a really nice landscape, or if you want a sweeping view in a city, anything like that. If we swipe up down here, you can do a 180 or you can do a 3x3. I prefer the 3x3 because it does give you more flexibility to crop it later on. And then I like to have a countdown of 3 seconds. That way you can start the panorama and your camera has time to stop shaking before it starts. And then for the parameter settings here, I pretty much keep all of these at auto. I keep the exposure at auto, the white balance at auto, but the photo format I do raw because I do want to have those individual photos as well later on in addition to the stitched together one. That way I have flexibility if I want to do some custom editing. But if you don't want to do that at all, just select photo format JPEG, and you're just going to get that final output. And then for the focus mode, I like to keep that at continuous. And just to show you what this does, when we have it the 3x3, we click right here. It's going to count down, and then it's going to start taking the 9 individual photos. So you can see where the gimbal pans to get those, and then it's going to beep when it's done. You're going to see it saving the file. And then if we go here and look at our files, that is the stitched together photo right there. So it's both tall and wide, very cool. So next, let's go to the standard photo mode on here. If we swipe up from down here, you've got a couple options. You've got super photo and you've got standard. One thing to notice though, the difference is it's 9 megapixels for standard and it's 37 megapixels for super photo. So I highly recommend doing super photo to take advantage of that full resolution. And for the aspect ratio, it's really up to you. The 16:9 is a little bit lower megapixels if you want that 16:9 aspect ratio. But if you want a square photo in the 1:1, then I recommend selecting that. I personally do the 1:1 because again, it's going to use that entire aspect ratio area, and that photo is going to be able to be cropped both vertically and horizontally more easily later on. And then for these settings over here, I keep the exposure, the white balance at auto. The format, same thing again, you can do RAW or JPEG. I like to keep it at RAW. And then for the focus mode, I like to keep that at continuous. And it is also worth noting, you can switch the 1x or the 3x down here. So depending on what you want for your photo, you might want the 3x or you might want the 1x. It's very easy to swap. Let's go ahead to the low light mode. So the Pocket 4P does have a dedicated low light mode. And I will say it is a pretty incredible mode with auto settings. So if you don't want to mess with the low light manual settings that I just showed you, and you just want the auto ones, this is a great mode for you. So if you swipe over from here, I do recommend just keeping all of these set to auto because you're letting the camera decide how to expose that scene. And it does create some very high quality footage. So in addition, you want to keep the white balance set at auto as well, and the focus mode at continuous. So if you just want a simple low light, easy mode, this mode is going to serve you well. Let's talk about the slow motion mode. So this camera does offer 4K 240 frames per second. So if we swipe up, you can see that right here. If you're doing slow motion and you really want the best slow motion this camera can offer, I recommend simply going to the 8X and the 240 and getting the 4K 240. It looks fabulous. And then if we swipe in from the left here, for the slow motion mode, I do recommend keeping this on auto unless you're using ND filters. And then for the ISO range, I recommend going to 100 to 800. And of course, the slowest shutter speed this can do is 1/240 because it is 240 frames per second. So if you're in lower lighting like this right here, you may have to bump that ISO a little bit higher to 100 to 1600 because 240 is a fairly fast shutter speed. And in order to properly expose, you're gonna need a faster ISO. But do beware of noise and grain if doing this in low lighting. And then for the rest of these settings, I recommend keeping these in line with the standard video settings. So if it's daytime, do a white balance of 5600K. Now, in this slow motion mode, it's also worth noting that you can only use normal color. You can't use D-Log or D-Log 2, which is kind of unfortunate. I wish I could grade my slow motion footage as well. And perhaps DJI will make that available with the future firmware update. But in the meantime, you do have these different film modes. So if you want some of these cinematic looks built into this, like movie, retro, a bunch of these, there are some high quality ones here you can use. So I do encourage you to play around with those and select one that you like if you don't want the normal 10-bit color. For focus mode, I recommend continuous. And then image adjustment, I still recommend -2 and -2 if you're capturing it during the daytime. And finally, we're gonna go to the Hyperlapse/Timelapse mode down here. So first of all, let's talk about Hyperlapse. For Hyperlapse, make sure it's in 4K 30 up here. You only have 4K 25 or 4K 30, so I recommend doing 4K 30 if you're in the United States. And then for the speed down here, I recommend doing auto. This camera is really smart and really good about selecting that auto speed, and it does a really good job with it. And then it is worth noting you can do this in 1x or 3x. So if you do a Hyperlapse in 3x, that can be a pretty cool effect with the way it has your scene at that 60mm focal length. So I recommend experimenting with that and see if you like it. For the exposure here, if you don't want to do any grading later on and you're not using ND filters, then I recommend doing 100 to 800 if it's during the daytime, and then keeping your EV set to 0.0. And then for the white balance, I recommend doing the settings I showed you in the other mode. So I recommend doing manual, and I recommend 5600K for the daytime and tone at 0. If you are doing one at nighttime, do 3800K, and if it's sunrise or sunset, do 6500K. And then for the focus mode down here, I recommend keeping continuous, and the image adjustment, once again, I recommend -2 and -2 unless you're in low lighting. But switching gears here, let's go to the time-lapse mode. The time-lapse mode is very capable on here, and this camera can produce beautiful time lapses. So I recommend doing the custom mode because that's going to allow you to swipe up and select a bunch of parameters. So if you were doing a sunset time lapse, I recommend 2 seconds. If you're doing a daytime time lapse where you're going to go for several hours, I recommend 5 seconds. And then for the video duration down here, I recommend infinity. That way you can start and stop it whenever you want to, and it's not going to time out on you after a certain amount of time. But if you want to calculate what the resulting time-lapse length will be, you can drag these over and it's going to show you the final duration depending on the interval. So if you change the interval, it's going to affect the final duration, just like if you change how long it goes. So after you've checked that, then I recommend going back to infinity. And as far as time-lapse settings go over here, for the exposure, I do recommend keeping that at auto. But I do recommend dragging the ISO down as low as possible if this is a sunset or daytime time lapse, because putting the ISO slower like that is going to force your shutter speed into slower speeds, and slower speeds are going to give you a smoother time lapse. And with time lapses, you want as smooth the frames as possible. And for the white balance, I do recommend keeping that auto during a time lapse. Your white balance is going to change during the time lapse, and because your lighting is going to constantly be changing, and you want to make sure it has the proper white balance for all the different frames. And then for the format down here, if you know you just want a video and you don't want any individual photos to edit later on to create a time lapse with, you can select video. But if there's a chance you want the photos later on, then you want to do video plus raw. Those raw photos are going to give you a lot of time lapse editing flexibility later on. And then for the focus mode, you generally want to keep this set to single during a time lapse because you don't want it to change on you. So I recommend doing single, But one word of caution, make sure that you get the focus where you want it to be before the time lapse starts. So in this case, we want to click where we want it to be focused, and we want to make sure we have that set before we start it. If we don't do that, there is the potential that it could focus on something we don't want it to. So if you do that, make sure you set it first. If you don't do that though, continuous is generally fine as long as you don't have any objects that are nearby that are going in and out of your frame that are going to throw off the focus. And once you've set those settings, you're good to go for the time lapse. But one other thing I wanted to show you that you can do on this camera is you can also do a motion lapse. So you can do left to right, right to left, or custom. My favorite on this is custom motion. So let me show you what I mean. Let's set our parameters first. So I'm going to go back here and I want to do 2 seconds for 20 minutes. And make sure you go up here, by the way, and set this to 4K 30. You definitely want to get 4K 30 for your motion lapse. So we are going to rotate this to where we want the time lapse to start. And we're going to click plus to set our waypoint. And then we're going to rotate it to where we want it to end. And you can adjust horizontal and vertical. So I want this to kind of follow a diagonal during the time lapse. So I'm going to put it right there for the ending point. And then once you've set those, you can do a preview right here by hitting the play, and it's going to show you what it's going to do during those 20 minutes. But once you've done that, you click here and it's going to start capturing it. I'm not going to let it go for the full 20 minutes, but it is going to show you the countdown there, which is what I wanted to show you. And then the second numbers here, those are going to be the eventual time that the length of the time lapse will be after you capture it at 2-second interval. And your screen's going to go black to save as much battery power as possible also, which I really like. But then if you want to stop it before it's officially done, just click the shutter button here and you can do it that way. And if you want to clear the waypoints up here, click that X right there and it's going to clear them. So those are all of our modes right there. And if you'd like to learn more about the DJI Osmo Pocket 4P, make sure to subscribe because I'm going to have a lot more content with this camera, including how to get the most out of that DJI D-Log 2 color profile.